Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. And today's topic is going to be the strategy behind stage selection. I think there's a lot of depth that can go into this, or you can be very simple about it. So, we're going to catch all sides of the conversation. Unfortunately, Bam is not here today. But if you guys do enjoy the content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We've also been thinking about doing a Patreon. We do have the membership on Discord. If you guys want to go ahead and join the membership on Discord, it has a really good cut for the creators, a 90-10 cut. So if you guys want to ask us questions, you guys go ahead and subscribe to Discord, and there will be a questions channel. And if you guys do want us to do a Patreon, make sure to comment below and let us know uh, if you guys want us to start a Patreon and what kind of content you'd like to see on the Patreon. So with that being said, and also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, of course. So with that being said, let's get right into the topic: stage selection. So just a quick question: are you guys fuck it, let's start on PS2 kind of player, or do you strike, or are you the worst kind of player and you ask to strike and it ends up going to PS2?
I am the best kind of player. If you say let's go PS2, I say no strike, and then I say I strike PS2.
Okay, let's
I
rhyme.
am at I'm the type of person who like I'm always down to just play the game. Like if we're at a major, by all means, let's go through the strategy and eke out advantages. If we're playing at a local for like $10 and you're like, I'm gonna go through a full process, it's like, brother, please just play the video game. Like I didn't drive all the way over here for this shit. Like if you want to play
It's
rock, paper, scissors, we can do it after, but and the worst is when somebody tells you that they don't want to strike to PS2 or just start PS2 and then they strike there anyways. And that is the most annoying
That's
shit
worse.
of all
At
time.
least at least Ramses just strikes PS2 right off the rip. So it's like, oh,
Yes, that's
obviously you're
fine.
comfortable with PS2, so I'm striking it. I can get behind that. But when we strike the PS2 anyway, it's like, dude, are you kidding me? I guess at the end of the day, you get a little bit of information in terms of like what they don't want to play on. Uh, but obviously there's like mind games, right? Because they could, fake strike or whatever strike. I remember when I competed the most in Smash 4, if someone, well, I never wanted to go to Smashville because I don't know why that was like the go-to starting stage in Smash 4, because Smash 4 Smashville was hazards on and it was so fucking whack. I would just tell people, they'll be like Smashville, I'd be like, no, you can pick any stage, and I'll just throw out all my strikes. So I'll just be like, no Smashville, no this, you can go any other stage. I don't give a fuck. And that's how I used to do it when I competed a lot, just to streamline the process. But let's get behind the strategy with stages. And I think the first topic is, we'll start with we'll ease you guys in. The most boring part of strategies is going to be blast zones, right? I think blast zones is the most simple part. For example, when I think about Fox, you can go with a very simple strategy. So, I mean, I don't compete too much in Ultimate, but for the most part, I'll just ban Smashville in town because I'm Fox. And oh, this is a great time to explain floaties and fast fallers. So fast fallers, they'll actually die earlier horizontally because they fall quick. So they'll die earlier from the sides, but they'll survive longer if you try to KO them from the top, right? Because their fall speed kind of contradicts their vertical, I don't know, trajectory or whatever you want to call it, right? And then floaties, they die earlier off the top, but they survive longer horizontally. So if you think about a character like DDD, who is really, really heavy and he's the second fast, or like he's like one of the fastest fallers in the game, like second or third or something like that. He is one of, if not the hardest character to kill off the top because of the combination of his fall speed and weight, right? So if we're going to go into blast zones, that's something you got to think about. So Fox is extremely susceptible to like the times that Fox dies the earliest is obviously just any kind of offstage interaction, or just dying at like 40% to a Roy side beyond Smash 4 Town and City, where the horizontal blast zones are really close, and on top of that he's light, and on top of that he's the fastest faller in the game, right? So those kind of factors you can take into account with your character, and you can use your counterpick strategy more of just like, oh, okay, blast zones, right? Like you can look up all the different blast zones. There's not too many stages, excluding Yoshi's, that have a short ceiling. Most stages have like an average ceiling or a higher ceiling. In Smash 4, Town and City was infamous for being like the low ceiling counterpick stage, but there's not really none of that in Ultimate,
can I
except
can I
Yoshi's.
jump in real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yoshi's is a normal ceiling actually. It is
Whatever, but the
the
platforms are higher, blah blah blah
yeah.
blah, right?
Okay. Well, That is an important distinction, Charles.
It is. Okay,
Why are
okay.
you
So
so
Yoshi's an
mean?
average ceiling, but the platforms are a lot higher. So from
Yeah.
the highest point in which you can like do a grounded option on the stage, excluding town and cities like high platform layout, but obviously that's like a transformation or whatever, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean that is a distinction. It's a good thing you brought that up. I thought Yoshi's had a smaller ceiling. Does it also have average horizontal blast zones as well? Or is that
So
smaller?
no, the side blast zones are a little bit more tucked in.
Got it,
Um,
got it.
it's a little hard to say because like there's like the online like the Turna meta stage comparison tool thing, which is what most people use to look at blast zones, but it doesn't show you the exact like distance from like the side of the stage to the blast zone. And so I think because Yoshi's is a little bit smaller, it ends up being comparable to something like like a Final Destination or a Smashville. Because while the blast zones are closer in, the stage is also smaller. So the distance from the edge of the stage to the blast zone is kind of comparable. But yeah, just like objectively speaking, it has, I think, the closest blast zones out of all of the legal stages.
The European would know about Yoshi's. And that's another thing.
I do. It's a good stage.
Well, one thing about having a counterpick strategy is look at the rule set before you go to a tournament, especially if you're spending resources like money to fly and get a hotel and stuff like that. Do not get blindsided when you go to Europe and then you're like, "What? You're taking me to Yoshi's and I didn't ban Yoshi's?" Like, Jesus Christ, brother, you you spent all this money. Like, just look at the stage list. I mean, every region. I mean, I know the controversial stages right now, and I don't want this to turn into like a stage list conversation in terms of like the stages, but the controversial stages right now in Ultimate where you have to kind of keep an eye out for are going to be Kalos and Yoshi's. Those are the ones that aren't really consistent, but some regions run them and some regions don't, right? So be on the lookout for
And
that,
to some
obviously.
degree, still Lilat. Some
Oh,
regions still
Lilat. Okay,
run
that's another
Lilats.
curveball one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because does Europe use Lilat in your
No, no, no,
nine
no, no,
stage
no,
rule?
no,
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 no.
no.
But you guys have
Well, the
Kalos and
thing
Yoshi's.
we have Cows and Yoshis, and the thing is, France is like this exception where they refuse to accept like the universal European rule sets. So like half of the French majors do, and half the French majors don't. There are French events where technically Yoshi's Island is legal. Don't ask.
Wait, Yoshi's
Um,
Island, like the one with the crazy slants in the center and the edge?
so like
The one with the blobs
TLDR,
that
there's
come up?
yes, yeah. TLDR, there's like one major where they have like a stage rule set where you both gentlemen's a stage into the rule set out of a pool of stages.
What
So
the
there's like
fuck?
7 legal stages, and then there's like a pool of 6 where both players add one of the 6 stages. But it's like the most redundant bullshit ever because whatever they add, you ban, and whatever you ban, whatever you add, they ban. So like it doesn't really matter. But anyway, yeah, point is Europe doesn't really use Lilat except for like the struggling few regions tournaments that want to be different for the sake of being quirky.
Genesis 8 or 9
Sounds lit.
also had Lilat
Lilat,
legal.
yeah.
I can't remember if it was 8 or 9. I just remember Mars versus Gluto being at Lilat on game
Yes.
5, and I was like, huh? So that was
Curveball.
interesting. But I mean, the baseline being blast ones. Did you have anything to add on that, Tony? I got to turn off my stove real quick as you explain. Can I reach
Uh,
from here? Yeah, I can. Nice. Sorry about that. Go for it.
oh no, I feel gone. Thank you. So, I think that what we want to look at from there is to generally kind of gauge what your character is going to do with the blast zones. So, identify what you are recovering from, because keep in mind, it's not just a matter of whether or not you are going to go into the blast zone, but also the spots that you're going to recover from, because not every stage has the same vertical blast zones below the stage either. So on top of that, you're also going to have different stage floors, which are going to give you kind of ceilings that you can take off of or not. Thing that affects whether or not you can do certain wall clings or wall jumps. Of course, there's also things like Steve mining and other niche situations that are going to crop up from stage to stage. And then these stages are going to generally vary. And so you want to keep in mind whether the stage goes low. And then, of course, there's also stages like, actually, I think it was
You're talking about like
PS1,
bottom
wasn't it?
blast
That
zones,
you can
right?
go under. Yes, bottom blast zones, but
Yep.
also the structure of them. Speaking of Yoshi's, that's another example of a stage where you can't go under it ever. So it's not a matter of the blast zone is just in there. It's a matter of the stage just blocks you off from going under.
Hmm.
And so there's certain stages that will gate you off from that.
Right, and like there's like very specific characters like never let there's very specific rules like never let Mario go to Yoshi's, never let
Oh yeah,
Lucario go to Kalos because Lucario can like up B into a wall cling and stuff like that, right? Um
and he never dies.
Right, and like and it's a really big stage. I think that's another thing that
Hmm.
people don't account into for blast zones as well. Like the bigger the stage, you're technically like expanding the blast zones a tad bit because, like, say a character like Lucario that wants to farm rage and stuff like that, right? If he loses a neutral interaction at 150 center stage, right? But it's a big stage, and like technically the horizontal blast
Yeah,
zones are the same as another stage. When we talk about horizontal blast zones, it's like from the ledge to the blast zone, right? But that gets a little bit extended on these larger stages too. So if a stage is just really large, maybe some of these heavier characters you might want to avoid and stuff like that. So, and I love the point of the bottom blast zones. So I'm Fox pilled, obviously. So in Smash 4, having a large bottom blast zone was really good for Fox. It's generally good for Fox because up B can ledge snap from like the bubble. Like Fox can be in the bubble and still make it back up. So any character like Fox, Rosa, with the really strong vertical recoveries, you kind of like these bigger blast zones on the bottom because even if you do get down aired or something like that or spiked down there, you can sometimes survive because you just have a lot of wiggle room and you have a lot of verticality. But another thing that was a very important thing is Fox couldn't like run off fair footstool characters in Smash 4 when the
right.
bottom blast zone was really low. Like there wasn't a lot of space because Fox needed a lot of room to fall down and then jump back up to footstool, right? I don't know if there's a character that kind of does something like that from that's comparable to Smash 4 Fox Fair Footstool, but it could like understanding the bottom blast zones is a little bit more niche, but very important, especially if you're like edge guarding certain characters and stuff like that. I don't think it's as impactful as it was in Smash 4 because Fox was an extremely meta character in Smash 4 and a lot more popular. I think a lot of people don't realize how popular Fox was in Smash 4 at all levels of play because he was a little bit more simplistic and didn't play as fast paced, so more people could like play him. Like more the working man could play Fox in Smash 4, but
Right.
it's a little tougher in Ultimate. Uh, but yeah, so that's pretty much the baseline, I think, for
Oh,
counterpicking strategies. Oh, go for it, Ramses, if you wanted to add it more to like blast zones or like walls and stuff like that.
one thing I just wanted to add was there's something that I hear a lot. It's like don't take Snake to PS2 because the blast zone is lower. Not true, actually.
The platform is just higher, right?
Well, yeah, the platforms are like a tick higher than like a small battlefield. But really, like Final Destination, Hollow Bastion, Pokemon Stadium 2, Small Battlefield, and Yoshi's have the same ceiling height essentially. The ones that are a tad higher and all essentially have the same height as well are Battlefield, Kalos, Smashville, and Tana City. And so, if you want to avoid vertical kills, those stages can help you survive for longer. Town City being the most obvious one, because it's such a contrast from Smash 4, where it had the lowest ceiling by far. Now it has a raised ceiling. Smashville, kind of, the Animal Crossing stages, and then Kalos with the huge blast zones, and then Battlefield, which has, well, I mean, I don't want to say always, but has been a high blast zone um, stage for a while. And so I don't recommend taking like all of the upward character killing characters to these stages. So for example, like Mario, you don't want to take the battlefield. Like I recommend not doing that. But something like Kalos or Smash 4 Town City usually does pretty well against characters that want to kill vertically. So that's something I think you want to add as well. And talking about walls as well, what Tony said is true. You cannot go under the stage. But what I think also is worth highlighting regarding walls is it also limits recovery paths, right? And so if you want to know more about recovery paths, there's an awesome Smash University video on recovery paths and how to kind of like gather information and abuse recovery habits. But walls add a little bit of an extra dimension there, where because they cannot recover from essentially more under the stage, it makes it easier to spike and it makes it easier to two frame. So, for example, something like Fox, um, usually doesn't really like walls because Fox likes to ride the stage and that gives him some extra options. It's a little bit harder to do on, for example, Kalos
It's
or a
weird though.
Yoshi's.
So I'm gonna counter that argument. So
Okay, go ahead.
I like walls as Fox because I do get hit, but because I know because the wall adds a layer of defense in terms of stage teching, right? So if someone two frames me
Right.
on battlefield, and it's harder to do that, right? Because I have angle mix-ups, but if you get it, you get the kill. So it's kind of like this weird risk reward where it's like I'm probably going to take more overall damage as Fox because you will connect more down airs or whatever you're two framing with, right? But if you're going for a spike specifically, then I have the defense of teching the stage. But to
True.
Ramses's point, if you're going for a two frame that sends me outwards, it's probably better for you to have walls, right? Whereas if you're trying to like down tilt poke me back out or down smash me back out, then I have less mix-ups in terms of riding the wall since I'm not like going into the stage and like abusing Fox's broken snap because the Fox's up B is like really good in this game. Not only is the ledge snap, I just wanted to say that the ledge snap off Fox's ledge snap in general is just good, but yeah, so there's multitudes of things. It's like you're adding a layer of defense. You're also wall jumping, right? Where it's like, okay, the recovering player can like
Yep.
go like lower than usual, wall jump then double jump up B or like wall jump up B and stuff like that. So there's a ton of it just adds so many layers. And I mean, dang, we didn't even in terms of like stage stuff I guess layouts for the base stage because we're going to have a whole section on platforms. Obviously, that's going to be the next topic we'll get into. But slants are also a very big deal. You're probably not going to run into that complication too often, but slants will literally change the angle of moves. So slants is very good against like a Fox
Hmm.
illusion because if you're doing something like a Lucina down tilt that can two frame, but you're kind of like barely skidding the two frame with the bottom part of the hitbox. If you are now angling the Lucina down tilt downward, you got more wiggle room, right? Your hitboxes are going to go lower. So that's a like I said, most players don't have to think about that because I mean realistically the only time you have to deal with that is Yoshi's. But in the first couple years of Ultimate, Yoshi's was a standard counterpick for the most part.
Yep.
So it's another thing to take into account as if your character is susceptible to two frame and understanding your opponent's like toolkit for two framing. I mean, taking a Lucina to a slanted stage as Fox is so scary because like, oh man, like down tilt. There's so many moves that are now easier to hit. You make the
Right.
execution check just that little bit easier, which can snowball into damage stocks and all that stuff. Did you guys have anything else to add on slants?
I think if you want to talk about slants, TLR, my opinion of slants is that they're horribly uncompetitive and that essentially they turn situations that are knowable into situations that are not knowable because it can be a difference of pixels whether you land a frame earlier or a frame later. And that can significantly alter if you have follow-up pressure or not. Of course, it's talking like higher level, but I've seen it mess people up without people realizing what's going on. And so like I'm a huge Lilat hater. I think Yoshi's slants are barely acceptable because they're in a very contained space. But like if anyone argues like, oh, Yoshi slants are uncompetitive, I would say I would agree with them. Like I'm not, I would never argue with that
Oh,
because I
there's the
think it's
teching thing too, right?
objectively true. And then there's yeah, so like the jab lock thing, is that what you mean?
Yeah, the jab lock thing. Yeah, if you could explain that.
Right. So you cannot jab lock someone if they're riding up on a slant, if I remember correctly, or it's down on a slant. I haven't seen slants for so long, I legitimately forgot. But anyway, one of the ways you cannot jab lock your opponents. And so that also significantly changes the situation. But like at least that you can account for. Like that is like I don't think that is uncompetitive. I just think it's a little lame. That it would work on any other situation, but not if you're specifically looking at one specific angle of the slant. But again, like I just think having slants makes a lot of these situations that people kind of like know because every other stage is flat except for Lilat essentially, into situations that are very unknowable. And sometimes again, it's a matter of pixels or frames. But that can snowball in huge ways. And so like I'm not a big slant fan. I actually, Tony, you're a TO, so like I know your take before when you were like, I don't care about what stage we're on, I just want to play the game. It's a very TO pilled take. What do you think about slants? Give me your take from the various roles that you fill.
So I have a few different hats that I wear on this situation. So I will first say that many of my favorite personal stages, like aesthetically, as a player, are very unpopular stages. So love every Yoshi's. So big Lilat fan. I like bright, shiny things that play good music. So, as a TO, I like whatever gets me the least complaints. And so, naturally, as a TO, I'm all for getting rid of stages with slopes and any other odd geometry, just so that I don't have to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. I like it as long as everybody agrees that the rule set's okay and skill testing and consistent. I'm down with whatever. So, in this particular case, that usually means that you're not going to see any of these kinds of stages at the events that I run, just because there's so many complaints about them that usually they end up getting phased out. And any TO or event series that has a way of receiving repeated feedback from its attendees is generally going to eventually phase those out. And speaking of, including Genesis, I believe, was Lilat removed for Genesis 10?
I don't think Lila was legal for Genesis 10.
Okay, so and the idea is that generally when they get feedback, they're going to listen, because that's how you get customers. Now, as a coach, as per usual, it's what tools do I have and how can I make that profit me? So, if you are playing on a stage list with slopes, the first question is, are you practiced on them? If you're not practiced and capable of using them to your advantage, it doesn't matter whether it works to your opponent's advantage or not. You're not prepared to play on them. If you are practiced for them, then ask yourself, what do I get from this, and is it better than what I normally get? So if you feel like, for example, Roy obviously really likes Yoshi's melee. If you can get your side Bs and such there, but you're not going to be able to get those on any other stage that is legal for you to play, then those side Bs are obviously going to work best on Yoshi's. You're generally going to get better edge guard setups. Because of the stage layout being what it is, things are generally just favorable for you. So go there if it's between Yoshi's or Battlefield. Now, on the contrary, if you are looking to break down your opponent and focus on breaking down what your opponent does, then using Mars and Gluto as an example, ask yourself which one of us has the more delicate consistency here. Does your character have high active frames? Does it have forgiving hitboxes, etc., etc.? If it does, you are going to fare better through inconsistencies just through sheer virtue of you have more sides on the die that you are rolling. And as we've established here, I love rolling some dice. So if you want to be consistent, put more sides on the die so that the statistics favor you when you roll it. If you know that your opponent is, say, a Sheik or a ZSS or something of that nature, where they have very low active frames, they're very delicate, and the whole basis of the character is, if I don't make a mistake, I'm going to win. If I do make a mistake, I'm going to be punished harder than the average character. Then you should take your opponent to these stages. That is going to favor the player who has the more robust game plan, the more robust tool set that is going to be more consistent. And so that is the dynamic that I'm generally looking at as a competitor or a coach.
Yeah, I feel like in general, it almost feels like it's so hard to break down this topic because a lot of it is based off of your opponent's like playstyle or their character tools. You almost have to know that in combination of how not even just stages, but like stage mechanics work. Like, oh, this higher platform, right? Like, do you know that it's easier for Fox to up smash on a small battlefield platform or just lower platforms in general, right? But like for Sheik, it doesn't really matter how high the platforms are because their up smash is so tall and stuff like that. So, I mean, knowing your opponent's tool set, knowing your tool set, and then play styles is a little bit more in depth, but just the characters' tool sets are so important. And I think this is a good time to pivot into what I think is the most important part about stage counterpicks, even more important than blast zones. Like I said, blast zones are very surface level, and
Yeah.
what I think is even more important are things like walls or platforms, right? Where it's like those kinds of things completely change how the game works. And I think I've explained this multiple times on this podcast, but the main thing I want to tell anyone about platforms is platforms change the game dynamic so much because you cannot do an aerial and fall through the platform. So when you are when someone's positioned underneath the platform, it is essentially a ceiling over their head, because you have to fall through the platform before you can even engage a hitbox. Obviously, there's some characters with extremely good downers that don't have to give a fuck about this. Pyra, Ivysaur, stuff like that. Uh,
Choke.
Shulk, right? I've even heard Ramen bitch about like Sora Nair, like sharking
Oh
underneath
yeah.
a platform with like falling Nair 2 or stuff like that. So obviously there are going to be characters that can put like pretty good disjointed hitboxes underneath them and fall onto the platform and then be able to combo off of that. So they're the exception where they can open up or threaten someone with a hitbox when they're above the platform and their opponent's underneath the platform. But you should essentially think if there's someone underneath a platform, I like to call it the avenue of approach. Your avenue of approach gets changed because you have to force more horizontal interactions, right? And I'll use the character I play for an example. If I'm Fox, I can't really fall on top of my opponent with Nair if they're underneath a platform. Obviously, Fox still has incredible horizontal options. This is why he's such a good character, because he can play horizontal game. He can make horizontal. He's a character with horizontal threat, both speed and hitboxes with dash attack, or like dash into like whatever the fuck you want to do, or he can play a very crazy vertical game, right? And it's the combination of both those which make him such a threatful character. So even if your vertical gets shut down by someone being underneath the platform, you still have horizontal threat. But if your character doesn't have good horizontal, because not everyone's a top tier like Fox, so some characters don't have crazy vertical threat and horizontal threat, right? So you have to play the game very, very different when your opponent's underneath the platform and you don't have the lead and they're just camping underneath the platform. You have to think about what your avenues of approach are going to be underneath this platform. And I really want to set that basis first before we even go into like the nitpicky things like, oh, well, can my character up smash, or what kind of can my character up smash on this platform, or is this platform like kind of like DK is notoriously good for being, or good on PS2, because any stage with platforms that the platforms are a little bit higher and the ceiling is normal, then he can ding dong you earlier, right? Which is the cargo up throw up air, right? The infamous combo. So uh, there's obviously those niche things to think about in terms of platform height and all that combo conversion. But I think what's more important and what's going to happen more often is neutral interactions with these platforms, right? Look at a player like the Buzz, who is known for being very strong defensively. He loves going to battlefield. You should see how many times the Buzz counterpicks battlefield. I would go as far as say that the Buzz's most common counterpick stage is battlefield, and he knows and understands how to play around the battlefield platforms. But the biggest dynamic is a single platform layout. I think single platform layouts or no platform layouts change the game the most, because the two platform layout that's on the left and right, that's the most common you're going to see. Sometimes there's another platform on top like Battlefield, but we have small Battlefield, we have PS2, right? There's a lot of double platform layouts, or at least platform layouts with two platforms, one left, one right. And that changes the dynamic, because even if you have center stage, you have center stage, but you don't have a platform above your head, right? But
Hmm.
Smashville, and especially Hollow Bastion, when you have a singular platform in the center, and especially if it's bigger, then controlling that center stage is even more powerful, because you have a ceiling above your head, which is forcing different avenues of approach, or I should say, taking away avenues of approach from your opponent, right? So I think the neutral breakdown is way, way more important than like blast zones or platform heights. So, what are your thoughts on that, Ramses?
So we've talked a lot on this podcast about how Advantage State has evolved over the years, and how in its current state it's essentially kind of like forcing your opponent into the corner and then corner pressuring them. Kind of, I want to say what Spargo pioneered, because I think Spargo really is the one who kind of pushed how strong of an advantage corner pressure really is in Ultimate. And so, especially for a character like Cloud, who can kind of like juggle you in a way that keeps you away from center at all times. And so he stands at the center, he juggles you, and you cannot really contest him. And while not every character can do that, a lot of characters can emulate the idea of being in the center and forcing the opponent to interact at a bad, in bad circumstance, or going to the corner. And the same goes for like offstage. Like ledge trapping in this game is a lot less strong than it used to be. It's making a bit of a resurgence, but a lot of the time people just kind of cover the reverse of the center and then corner pressure you if you normal get up. And so what I really think is important when you're deciding your stage is how the corner pressure dynamic works, because I feel in current meta a lot of games are decided from the position of corner pressure. And so essentially there are two dynamics here. Well, three. Yeah, 3. Sure, 3. Let's go with 3. So there's biplat, so 2 platforms, one on the left, one on the right. There's center plat, and then there's no platform. And so generally,
And then
if you
triplat.
have
But yeah.
right triplat, but like talking about when we talking about corner pressure, triplat kind of functions like a
It's like
biplat,
almost the
right?
same, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
As a biplat.
Effectively,
Yeah.
it's very comparative. So that's. But you're right, Charles. You're very, very, very right. But yeah. So effectively, let's consider them biplats for this comparison. And so generally, the way I look at it is that the biplat stages, so like PS2, Battlefields, um, what they do is they make it easier for you to get out of the corner because generally you're going to get another route towards the center. Whereas normally you like if it's a final destination, so no platform, it's just you, the opponent center, right? Like you, opponent center, get past them. Whereas a platform above the opponent who's corner pressuring you, it gives you an extra path to take to the center. Is it a good path? No, not necessarily. But it adds to the mental stack, and the more options your opponent has to cover, the weaker their punish is, or the more they have to choose, in which case the more openings there are, right? And so biplats generally give you less explosive corner pressure situations, which is favorable if you're playing against a cloud, because cloud is going to corner pressure you. So every single option that you have that's extra is nice. But if you are the cloud, you probably want to stay away from something like a biplat in terms of optimizing your corner pressure. Now, the thing about center platform layouts is that it also gives you a bit of a route to the center. So think about characters like Crom or Roy who have a lot of airspeed, who can kind of like jump, double jump to the center platform. It can be very powerful, but these options are very committal. That said, if you're successful, you essentially get to contest the center, which is not true for a Pokemon Stadium 2, right? Where you get an extra route, but it's a route. Whereas for the center platform layouts, you get an extra destination because the center is, well, 2 layers. It's the platform and the actual like center of the main stage. And so again, what we get is we get a little bit higher risk, but a little bit more reward. And so that's something that you want to consider as well, right? Like, does my opponent have a good like full hop double jump to center? If so, you might want to stay away from these types of layouts. Is my opponent in general strong in the air? Okay, well, maybe it's a little bit scary to give them the option to have control over the center from a platform, because if they're strong in the air, the platform is going to give them immediate like drop aerials, which is obviously very powerful for these characters. And so that's something that I want to highlight as well, is that I think the platforms give a lot of nuance to corner pressure situations, to advantage state with that as well. Kind of talking about like juggling in general too. Most good juggle characters like center stage platforms because they can cover the platform without having to stand on it. And so you essentially get a final destination type juggle where the entire stage is kind of flat, especially something like Hollow Bastion, where the platform is very low to the ground. But when you're juggling, you also get a little bit of extra protection because the opponent cannot fall through the platform with an aerial. And so you get to shark them. And so, like, again, what I want to urge you guys to do is think about how platforms affect your advantage state, not just your neutral. But I do agree with Charles. I think platforms have a very profound effect on a neutral. And so I'll ask Tony about his opinion on the topic. What do you think about the effect of the different layouts on neutral interactions, Tony?
So I'll go ahead and just go into a bit more detail on what you guys are already saying, and just say like to specifically build upon the way that platforms work as ceilings is generally what they do is they make it so that you have to choose between falling through or press an attack that is not going to go through. And so essentially what it does is it makes full hop, fast fall a reactable option. And so it requires your opponent to choose between fast fall or aerial, because they can still fast fall through and then they can drift so that they don't land on the platform and kind of delay their drift, so that instead of jumping over in an arch, they basically drop and fall almost what looks like in a line, and they'll basically make an acute triangle to come down on top of you in order to cross you up. And so there's a tension between their ability to make their full hops quick and their ability to make their full hops ambiguous. And by ambiguous, I mean, are they landing in front of you or behind you? And so you, most common way that, especially I would say, is relevant at mid-level, is that if you are landing on somebody's shield, they're going to try and shield grab your aerial because you're probably not doing it optimally. And so even if ultimate frame data tells you that your aerial shouldn't be shield grabbable, it will be. So what happens is, well, if I don't want to get shield grabbed, I need to land behind my opponent. But if my opponent then tries to shield grab, it's my turn and I get to take advantage of them whiffing that shield grab. And so when you are playing a game as speed chess-esque as Ultimate, it's very simple to make that reaction check and make a mistake for both players. And so for consistency, the player who is in control of the full hop here is generally advantaged, because whether the opponent can shield grab or not, they're still going to land behind you, and they're generally not going to be punished for it directly, but they are setting themselves up so that they get to react to a much more lenient window, which is the whiffed grab, which is going to be much easier to react to than a full hop fast fall. Now, this changes once there is a ceiling involved, as Charles mentioned, because a full hop is much slower than a full hop fast fall in terms of time. So that means that you can always react to it. Because you can react to it, that allows you to react to whether or not they fast fell in the first place, and then when they fast fell generally. And if you see them drifting behind you, then you will at least never whiff a shield grab because you already know that they're landing behind you. And this conveniently typically is going to involve you placed roughly outside of their ledge roll distance, like under the PS2 platform, that would be the outer dot on the side of the platform. Like you'll see 3 dots on the platform. On Battlefield, this is there's an ornate swirl that kind of points out just roughly where you need to stand. So the idea is you are, I believe that I have heard it described as a house. If you are using your back to the center of that platform in that way, you have a house of protection. And so that's actually one of the things that's very powerful about Steve, is that if you put up a wall there, then not only do you have a wall and a ceiling now, but you're doing it for relatively minimal resources, and you can't just break the platform like you can the side blocks. And so it forces very distinct and asymmetrical decisions between, do I go in sideways or vertically? Even for characters like Fox, where both of these are great options, all of a sudden now you can either break the platform from the side, or you have an unbreakable platform that you can fall through reactively. And so
With
there
some of the best
is
sharking, by the way, up air. So it's
he needs it.
nasty combo.
So
he needs it. Tony, care to comment about that?
I don't know what you're talking about. So likewise, from center to toward platform, you'll find that generally if you backdash from center, most characters' backdashes are going to place them at roughly this place as well. And so usually what you have is you'll see players run off platform so that they're landing slightly off center, and then their backdash will almost always place them under platform. And if you go further back in Ultimate, you'll actually see it originally was only Leo who was positioning exactly in this way, but it is becoming a much more common thing to do now. And so the idea there is you use the platform as a neutral gating tool, as Charles mentioned. And then likewise, that also always sets you up so that if your opponent does go for what is a very reactable shield grab, guess what you're perfectly positioned for if you have a vertical juggling throw, or if you have an actual vertical combo off of it. So say a Joker up throw to up air setup that isn't necessarily true, but it can set you up so that you can basically go for the fake version, land on the platform with the up air, and then what happens is either your up air is probably going to be just frame positive enough to stuff them out trying to mash out an air or a down air, and then if they air dodge, Joker's going to cancel his own up air onto the platform, and so he either gets the drag down, or he's going to be frame advantage by you air dodging to avoid the up air in the first place. And so it's a win-win for Joker as long as he's ready to make that execution check. And of course, this is less true on Lilat because then the slight angle makes it so that that up air is not necessarily going to land on the exact frame that the Joker player needs, to pull it back to stage selection from the previous topic. So likewise, if you are looking at monoplats, so this is your Smashville, certain transformations of effectively Town and City is a single plat for the transformation where the two outer platforms are very high. And so generally what you are looking for in this position is if you are playing against an opponent who is very full hop heavy, that dynamic is going to apply a larger percentage of the engagements that you and your opponent have. So if your opponent is full hopping a lot and you're not, then that's obviously going to be to your advantage. As Ramses mentioned before, triplats and biplats tend to act very similarly, except they don't act similarly around center. And so this is particularly advantageous for characters that don't necessarily want to play their neutral from center. So characters like Samus or Duck Hunt, where they're already incentivized to corner themselves. The idea here is that they essentially play small ball neutral, where nobody gets the full hop, which partially mitigates the weakness of those characters that they have relatively poor full hops or relatively reactable full hops. And so if nobody gets a full hop in those spaces, then obviously characters like Samus are rewarded for this. And then as you get towards corner where it's no longer an issue, that's fine too, because that's where Samus wanted to be anyway. She's already going to run back there and start charging charge shots. So I think that those are the way you generally want to be looking at that. Another way to look at it is to kind of rotate the screen a little bit and look at stage width. So in this case, you want to ask yourself, what proportion of the game do I want to spend on stage versus off stage? And so again, all of these are going to be a double-edged sword, but certain characters are less upset about being forced to play larger percentages of the game off stage. So characters like Bayonetta comes to mind right off the bat, Game & Watch, etc., etc. These are characters that are happy to play on stages like Smashville, where there is comparatively less stage than a character like PS2. And likewise, characters that generally don't want to be on stage, and if they could play without without an off-stage game at all, would be very happy. So characters like Stink, obviously, are more likely to like PS2, not because of the vertical blast zone, but because there's a lot of stage to it. It's dark and camouflages the projectiles a little bit, that kind of thing. And for the record, I don't think that's something that we should really go into that much, but there are various niche circumstances that come up on stages and character colors. So for the most part,
the Japan
less so now. Yeah, there used to be a point where it was possible to play characters that were genuinely just not visible depending on your form of color blindness, and you could not make out the character model. And so I'm not sure if we still have the colorblind picking rules, but
and
we do in Europe.
Okay.
Shout out to
The
Oh, that's going way back. Yeah.
wait.
You know.
I don't.
Wait, you don't?
KTL the Army?
No, it was the Buzz versus, was it Otori?
I think so.
It was the Buzz versus Otori, and the Buzz had a hard time seeing, like visually seeing when the flicker was on or off. I don't know what the default is. I think whatever the default one was, the Buzz like whatever wasn't default, the Buzz had a hard time seeing. So, but they didn't know what I don't think there was rules for it, and then Otori was like, "Oh, I want the flicker like off the default one for the counterpick." And then the TO had to make a choice. I think Otori got it where he could change the flicker.
That's crazy.
The grime was real and Brawl, bro, and there was like practically no money on the line, but the grime was the realest in Brawl, and that's how you know motherfuckers played for pride back then. It was
we wanted it. Yeah,
that's crazy. Okay.
That's actually, I think that was also the implication of that is where music counterpicking came from as well. Like, I don't think we specifically had to have an event. It was a matter of, well, what other settings could you counterpick? Can you counterpick music? And we just talked about it. I was like, well, advantage. If it's your counterpick, brother, go for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the talk about Brawl there. You think you have it bad now on stage choices. Woo!
Oh, baby.
Yeah, so a dynamic that isn't even important enough to discuss because it doesn't come up anymore is there used to be a tension. Do I go for a stage that is going to give me consistent benefits or infrequent but very high impact benefits? So there were stages like Norfair that were illegal where you could basically stall out the game until it would turn into a hazard sequence, and then it turned into a mini game of who can play the hazard sequence. And then different characters were advantaged differently by this.
Yeah, Metaknight won out, of course, as he tends to do.
Yes.
As he always should. Yes, the true defender of fundies
The
and
true
rule
defender of
set.
fundies.
Yes.
I know in the most recent Brawl rule set, they just added a clause where Metaknight can never counterpick a stage.
That's awesome.
Like
That's
if you pick
hilarious.
Metaknight, you just never get to pick the stage. That's so
cool.
funny to me.
And you know what's funny? Meta Knight's still fine.
Yeah,
Dude,
he's
he's
still
broken on
by
every
far
stage.
the best character.
Well, he
Doesn't matter.
Hey, I'm just saying I don't think he won the last couple majors, did he?
I think it was Ice Climbers, right?
I think it was Ice Climbers and Player One.
Player One, yeah.
So I'm trying to remember which I want to,
because I know the guy that
I want to say it was Cody.
It was
Cody plays both Ice Climbers and Meta Knight.
Ice Climb,
yeah, like shows off which one he ever wants to show off. To my knowledge, it's like he usually.
To be fair, I think he could have won with Meta Knight. He just chose to win with Ice Climbers,
exactly.
and then
there's also now I forgot his tag, the Brawl Meta Knight player 604M or something like that. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Oh my god, now I feel bad.
But he sound familiar, yes.
They so like 2 years ago they played Meta Knight Mirrors and Grands at SmashCon, if I remember correctly.
And I think he's or they are still doing very well.
If I remember correctly, he was playing Toon Link.
Yeah, he counterpicked Ice Climbers with Toon Link.
Yeah,
because he didn't want to play with Meta Knight. So that's the craziness you get to when stage picks and Meta Knight are hotly contested topics in your game.
Big fan.
Glad we don't have to deal with that.
I love Brawl so much. You had to learn gravity values because it could affect your recovery depending on which transformation, which is something else we don't have anymore.
Thank God.
If you got caught on the floor of a stage transformation, or God forbid you got comboed, so a lot of the footstool combos that come up now would actually turn into guaranteed combos for your stock. You just couldn't do anything about it because they could just pin you on the ground for a guaranteed tech chase, and the gravity would just suck you down. And it doesn't matter. You just can't do it. You can't get out.
Good times. Good times.
That would be great. I got us off topic here. I apologize.
Yeah, kind of recentering on the topic of stages. Did you want to add anything, Charles?
Something that I forgot to add in the beginning. That's a very generalistic strategy for counterpicking. If you want to, I wouldn't say just like, oh, if you've never done this before, just rip it in tournament. But something that you can kind of notice and see in friendlies or whatnot is there are characters that are. Most characters that have broken edge guarding are light characters. So if you're a light character and you want to live as long as possible, but it doesn't, and you pretty much edge guard your opponent for free, maybe it's like a Crom or something like that, like characters with really bad recoveries, or like a Little Mac, or even maybe a meta character, but you're just really good at edge guarding said meta character, you're really experienced at it, or you just understand the flow chart to it, is you can take your opponent to very big stages and you will be getting most of your stocks via. So if you're confident that you can get most of your stocks via edge guard, you can pick very large stages, like large blaststone stages, because remember that the bigger the stage is, the less likely you are to get an edge guard from center stage, right? So you can, it's like hand in hand kind of thing, where it's like you could go for something like Smashville, where it's smaller blaststone, but the stage is smaller too, so you can get more edge guard scenarios, and then you capitalize off of that. Or you can go with the mentality of like, okay, I want a big blaststone stage, and then I set up these edge guards. I'm killing you 70-80% or sub 70 to 80% because I'm always nailing my edge guards, and then I'm living a little bit longer. So that's another, there's way more variables that go into it, but that's another baseline strategy you can experiment if your character is really strong off stage, or if you're just really good at edge guarding specific characters and stuff like that. So that's another just general tip. Another thing I want to talk about with platforms as well, and we're going to have a whole section on Steve, by the way. That'll probably be the last topic, because I think the character that can create platforms, we have to talk about. We're gonna have to have a whole section on him, because he obviously changes the game a lot, and especially
he's a handsome man.
Yes, he's very impactful to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
He's very impactful. Yeah. For sure.
Another thing to note as well, I really want to bounce off the topic of your advantage state with platforms, and kind of when you have platforms, remember that this meta is very based off of, can I get my opponent on a platform and get them in a platform tech chase, where I either, bad characters can 50-50 on a platform tech chase, good characters can react and get a guaranteed tech chase, and then other characters can cover all options. So you don't even need to react, and you just cover all options at a specific time, corn up air, stuff like that, right? So understand, and like, and that's why I know I've heard other Fox players say that they like Fox on Final Destination. I think I just suck on that stage personally. But I also think there's so much value in Fox hitting a dash attack and then putting someone on a platform tech chase. And even if I'm bad, I get a coin flip for like 60 damage. I'm down.
Oh
And
yeah.
then if you're good, it's a guaranteed 60 because you react, right? So it's understanding your damage output on platforms. Obviously, the simple stuff is the platform extensions, right? Oh, I hit up air on Fox. I get 1 or 2 extra up airs because there's a platform and I'm moving upwards with my opponent as I'm spamming the same move or whatever, right? And then there's also so that's the baseline. But the more advanced stuff nowadays, because I was even watching some old sets like Evil Grands and stuff like that. Dude, someone would put someone on a platform and then just reset back to neutral. And I'm like, dang. Yeah, nowadays it's such a different game where it's like you put someone on a platform, it's time to cash the fuck out. You know what I mean? And characters like Fox is so important because off of things like a dash attack, which usually will lead to only one guarantee follow up, or sometimes not even like a guarantee follow up. It's more of like a reset scenario. But if you have a platform and you hit them at certain percentage ranges, it can be a lot of damage, right? And
Mhm.
even things like down throw and stuff like that, or up throw on a top platform, on top battlefield platform, sometimes that can even lead to damage too. So when you can get grabbed by Fox and take 60 to 80 damage, all of a sudden you're playing a really different game, right? And that's because of the existence of the platform and extending your offense and understanding your offense based around these platforms. Now, I also want to flip the conversation before we move into the Steve topic is your disadvantage state. And before I even get into this, I need to explain fall speed and floatiness once again. When you're a fast faller, and Ramses kind of went into this, explaining like full hop, and Tony also explaining this like full hop fast fall, right? The faster faller you are, the harder it is to react, right? A Fox full hop fast fall and a Rosalina full hop fast fall are two very different things. So when Fox full hops fast fall, there's a threat of Fox fast falling down, and you have to literally, and this is why fall speed is so broken. You have to take a guess if you want to throw out a attack if you think they're going to go land and try to shield, right? But if they double jump, then so you're still taking a guess, right? You still are rolling a dice and you're like, shit, are they going to land or are they going to double jump? Even if you have a disjointed attack like cloud dash attack, which can cover fall down attack and fall down shield, right? Because you're just hitting them before they hit the ground. But there's the threat of the double jump, right? Now, when
Right.
there's platforms, there's more things to reset. Remember, platforms are things to reset resources on, right? So if Fox jumps out of the corner, he can double jump and then get to the top platform, or he can fast fall down onto that one platform, or he can fade back and fall back into the corner. All of this stuff is happening, and especially without the double jump burn, you have to take a guess for your offense, right? Or try to bait a resource out. So be very very mindful of the fall speed of your opponent when you are going for corner pressure stuff like this, because you just have to take into account that your window to react gets smaller and smaller the faster fall speed your opponent has, right? And always look at those platforms as a way, because if you fast fall down, like if I double jump and you already committed forward and I double jump and I'm like, oh, I can guarantee get to this top platform, reset all of my resources and shield, and even if they come up to me, like I've essentially like getting closer to the center, but I'm still at a minor disadvantage because I'm on shielding on a platform. But on these high platforms, especially these high platforms, not a lot of characters can do a full hop aerial. That some characters will have to double jump aerial to pressure you, or like double jump up and then falling aerial to try to keep as most frame advantage as possible, right? So keep that in mind when you're using platforms to defense. And honestly, we might even pivot into another topic before Steve, being Final Destination, because I think Final Destination specifically is the most
It's its
different
own
stage.
class.
Yes, I think it's one of the most volatile counterpick stages because it is
Mhm.
so different. I think the only other stages you could maybe mention is like Yoshi's, but even then, I think Final changes the game more than Yoshi's. Yoshi's adds like really dumb and weird skill checks in terms of like slants and stuff like that, and there's the walls and stuff. But Final is like omega volatile. Um, but another thing to
Before we
mention
get
about.
into that,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, yeah, I just wanted to say two things because we're getting into like more specific topics, and I just wanted to say like two things on like generic like stage pick.
Okay.
Because like one thing that is very common is like do you want to go PS2, and they say okay. It's fine like if you want to go PS2 first because you're like Tony, you just want to play the game, that's cool, totally cool. But something that I need people to start knowing is that PS2 is significantly wider than any other stage in the game. Wider than Kalos, wider than Town and City. And I don't mean just like a little bit. I mean like significantly wider than both of those stages. So whenever you're going to PS2, know that you're you're picking a stage in which you're probably never gimping your opponent. Like, if your opponent plays Cloud, please do not go to PS2 unless you're playing like Aegis. You know what I mean? But like, the stage is really wide. So first of all, it's going to be harder to corner people. So if you're playing against something like a zoner who you're probably going to be beating by cornering, don't go to PS2. If you're playing against something like Cloud or Aegis who you're probably beating by gimping them, don't go to PS2. Well, by just eliminating those two groups, you've probably already eliminated like 99% of the characters you're going to be seeing, because they're either zoners or the characters really broken neutral with bad offstage games. They're very common meta picks. Now, if your opponent's like a close quarter character and you lose by being cornered, please go to PS2. And then we kind of go back to this idea of the side platforms helping you get out of the corner as well. So like, yeah, PS2, really, really good stage. If essentially you want no advantage state or disadvantage state.
Do you guys feel like fast characters are better on stages that are wider just because they have more room to abuse their speed? Because that's another topic I've talked with a bunch of other individuals, and I think the more room like a Fox or a Mithra has to dash back, it sounds pretty strong if they're not going up against the zoner. If they're going up against just like maybe a standard character that's just not a
Right.
zoner or whatnot. I'm just very curious to hear your thoughts, because I feel like, or at least when I'm playing a speedy character, or whenever you're in speed art, you understand the vibes. Like, do you want
get
more
it.
room to run around?
So for me personally, I'd say yes. I think the value of stage with scales with the value of your dashback. And so if you have really good whiff punish, your dashback is better, right?
Right.
So a character like Snake, Palu, Greninja, Speed Art Shulk, Mithra, like all these characters with really good dash attacks, essentially. I think they get better as the stage get wider. I mean, obviously the number one example is Sonic, right? Sonic on
Sonic or a Fox,
PS2.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sonic on PS2. I think PS2 is like his best stage. Partially because he just gets so much room, right? I don't think it's his best stage in every matchup, obviously. Like he thrives a lot on off stage. So like I don't think it's great to do against characters that you want to push off stage. But generally, yeah, I think I would say so. I don't think it's necessarily fast characters, because there are fast characters with bad whiff punish. But generally, yeah, so I would phrase it like this. I would say the better your whiff punish, the more you like space.
Oh, that's a very good way to put it. What are your thoughts on that, Tony? Like move speed with width.
So this falls into the general guideline I was saying before, where if you think that a larger, or basically as the game approaches being Bridge of Elden, you prefer ideal theoretical stage would be one of those two. Then you just pick
I
whatever's
lagged.
closest.
My internet skipped out. The last thing I heard was as the thing approaches Bridge of Elden. So if you could start on that sentence again, and
I said, as the game approaches Bridge of Elden being your character's best stage, you should probably go to PS2. And as the game approaches Norfair being your best stage, or Skyloft, something of that
WarioWare.
nature. Yes. if you like WarioWare, go to Yoshi's.
True, actually.
there you go.
I love Skyloft, by the way. I wish we had that stage legal.
It's a very cool stage. Oh,
It's
and
one of-
before we jump into Final Destination, another general thing I want to talk about is high platforms specifically, because this is a little bit more niche. If your character has a very good full hop, double jump, I'm talking like Fox Greninja, ZSS, or has a burst vertical option, Sonic Up B, I think one of Sonic's best stage is Town and City First Transformation, because he can be in a lot of different scenarios, but he can just up B out, and then he has the mix up of landing on one of those side platforms. But not a lot of characters can like vertically burst up that fast, right? So I think you need to take into account high platforms against characters that can have burst verticality in especially in disadvantaged situations. So like a Fox double jump, a Greninja double jump, a ZSS flip jump or double jump, Pikachu quick attack, a Sonic up B, these kinds of things, they get really good value off of higher platforms. So Battlefield top platform, Town and City, and then the obvious like extreme version is the Town and City First Transformation with the two high left and right platforms. So I just wanted to mention that because that's like a quick niche thing. Did you guys want to move on to Final Destination?
I have nothing more to add. No. Let's move on.
I feel like it's would fit the character of the discussion more to go to Steve first and then finish with Final Destination.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
Sure.
All right. So before we even get into this, you know what? Maybe we can learn something from the Brawl community. Because what if Steve wouldn't be allowed to counterpick? Because that's like a slight that it is a nerf. It is a nerf to the character, but we're not.
It's not a
fucking
slight
with
nerf.
it.
That's a big nerf.
That's a
That's a
huge
big
nerve.
He
Actually,
fucking
I
needs
think.
it. Damn it. Okay.
He does. No, I think it's raw because he can
Because
create his own stage anyway.
exactly. But I guess the first thing I want to go over is I guess yeah. Let's just go over this. The resources.
I'd like to
right?
see Steve in top 8s first.
Oh dang! Hey man,
Damn.
Aquila didn't show up. Not my fault. Aquila
Yeah.
didn't show up to Genesis. But it's interesting because Steve not only we'll go more into the layouts, but I just want to cover the raw resources first. I think Steve is another character that you don't want to take the PS2. You give him a lot of room to run away in with, right? But I think the resources are really good because if he gets so much mining off, second to third stock, you're dealing with stone blocks, which have more health, and that's why, in my opinion, one of the better. This is like theory crafting, but I think a strong strategy against Steve is rushing him down and pressuring him early, even though wood combos are better than diamond combos for damage, technically. Or like there's less counterplay because there's not as much SDI counterplay involved, right, with the wood. So
Yep.
it's risky, obviously, but that's when the blocks have the least amount of health. So more of your moves will be able to break the wood block rather than if it was a stone block or other types of blocks with more health. So you got to be really aware of what kind of resources Steves are getting, and I don't know if Steves just banned Smashville Town and City because they get wood, mainly like dirt and wood from those stages, and those are the ones with the least amount of health. And then there's other stages where they get like more iron and stuff like that. I think it's like Kalos, FD. I don't know all the resource things off the top of my head, but
I can tell you like the things you should be watching out for.
all right, go
So
for it, Ramses.
on Kalos and Hollow, he has areas of the stage where he can mine iron only, and the rest of the stage is just stone. Lilith is full iron, and PS2 is full stone. And so there are advantages and disadvantages to something like Hollow Bastion. And I think Kalos is stone and iron. I'm like 99% sure, but it could be full iron. I think it's stone and iron. Either way, there's advantages to having two different cycles, especially for Hollow Bastion, which is often seen as one of, if not Steve's best stage because of this property. You always have access to iron. So whenever you want, you can decide to mine on like the iron strip and get more iron, which is obviously like his most powerful resource. The issue with something like Lilith, where he only gets iron, is that you mine way slower. So the mine cycle takes more frames than it does on like a wood stage.
I didn't know that for iron itself.
Yeah, so like, and it goes for stone as well. So on PS2, he mines a little bit slower because it's stone instead of wood. But like for stone, it doesn't really matter much. But when it's Lilith, it does matter because not only do you mine a little bit slower, you're also using your resources to make walls. You're using your iron resources to make walls because you cannot dump stone because you don't get stone, right? Unless you're at the beginning of the match. And so Lilith is a little bit extreme where you only get iron, you don't have access to walls. I think I actually not sure how it messes with TNT, but I do know you just get a resource shortage most of the time. Whereas on something like Hollow Bastion, you can get stone whenever you want, you can get iron whenever you want. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. The downside of that, arguably, is that both of the types of materials are on different cycles, or so I've been told. And so if you want to get to diamond and you're mixing your mining between pure iron and pure stone, it takes a little bit longer because you're less deep into your cycle. And diamond mostly shows up a little bit deeper into the cycle. And so that's generally what you want to consider. If you want to ignore all that, like if you learn anything, what I would say is just ban Hollow Bastion. And as far as I know, ban Kalos. That's what I've been told.
TLDR, stone plus
players.
iron, not good.
Broken. Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything on the mining cycles, Tony?
So I was gonna say, if I remember correctly, Smashville and Town and City are stages where Steve can't mine the walls. So
that's huge.
Basically, he can't plank. So or he can't sustainably plank, I should say. And so that turns off an entire dynamic check of a matchup. that I don't think players are too aware of. So, if only just having enforceable ledge traps more often, or rather having a punishment and have Steve actually have to make harder choices. It's pretty strong. I know Steves generally like these stages quite a bit because they do value getting a variety of resources more often, along with the importance of wood in crafting things like crafting table. So the dynamic of losing iron, or rather having an iron pool more often. So crafting table doesn't actually take up the same resource based on what is being used to build it. It's going to, if I remember correctly, it's like 1 unit of wood or 2. I think it's, I forget. I actually forget the numbers. I'm sorry. Essentially it uses quite a bit of dirt. It uses quite a bit of stone, and then it uses multiple units of iron also if it has to be pulled from that pool. And so if your pool of resources is exclusively stone and iron, then if you get a single sustained edge guard, it doesn't even have to do damage. It's just time wise. If you can keep him out there for like 10 seconds with the crafting table broken, you can actually go through an entire resource bar that way. And so this allows you to attack him in a dimension that you can't normally attack characters in general, and Steve in particular, where you just annihilate his resource bar. And that, especially if that does end up taking the stock, that can completely reverse momentum of that game. And I have seen some pretty strong comebacks against Steve that usually start out because of this.
Damn, it's so interesting. Yeah, so I'm not as active in current coaching in the current meta, so it's really cool to hear both of your guys' thoughts on Steve. You guys are definitely a lot more knowledgeable on the character slash like meta around the character, so really sick to hear that. We're actually running pretty low on time, so we won't talk about final, but I guess closing thoughts on the Steve like block formations, right? Because I mean, the general idea is that Steve builds a wall of blocks by a platform, so he both has an unbreakable ceiling, and then it essentially forces you to burn double jump to go to. What's your guys' thoughts on just that, real quick, as we wrap things up?
Sorry, Discord just shut the bed, so I couldn't hear the full extent of your thoughts. Can you repeat the
Yeah,
final
sure.
sentence?
So we don't have too much time. I actually got to head out very soon, but
True.
the last thing I want to talk about is just the dynamic of like Steve building a wall next to a platform, and I would love to hear both of your guys' thoughts on that. To my understanding, it's like since you can't interact with the platform that much, you're either forced to double jump to try side switch, or you have to actually like hit blocks and just play the whole like Pac-Man hydrant game of like, are you gonna hit the blocks first, or am I gonna hit the blocks first?
Um, I don't have a lot of opinions on it because I think effectively like Steve's anti-airs are so potent that you almost never should threaten like full hop over a wall anyway. Unless you're full hop, like if you're Fox, it's a little different. Yeah, Charles, you have privilege.
Of course,
Because
fastest
like
forward.
yeah, Fox full hop fast fall is like it's a lot hard to react to than most characters full hop fast fall. Most characters full hop fast falls are around 30-ish frames. And a lot of full hops don't like depending on the character. I don't want to say a lot, but there are some full hops that don't even make it over the wall, so they have to like get even more creative. Point being that most of the time you're not full hopping over the wall anyway. You can feint full hopping over to make him anti-air, but then he can just kind of like up tilt, and then when you double jump away, he can just go back to mining, and you just like wasted time. So I never felt like full hopping over the wall was a very viable way to interact with Steve personally, except for the exceptions like Fox and Joker, DD, stuff like that. So to me, it doesn't really add that much power to Steve. But maybe Tony disagrees.
I think that there is multiple angles you can attack Steve, and I think that more Steves are vulnerable to you jumping in than they should be. And I also think that this requires you to have other avenues of making it through the wall in order to create actual mix-ups. If the opponent is reacting to your jump squat to anti-air, you've probably made a mistake that there's that little tension in their decision making. The idea here is that a lot of players in the current meta, even the ones who do beat top Steves, generally do so by full hopping in. even though it should not work as much as it should, or as it does, I should say.
Fair enough.
So I absolutely agree with Ramses that that is correct. However, that also requires the Steve players to have practiced their DPs on reaction. So, unfortunately, this is a skill. It's a specifically trained skill, and it is a skill that, because most players are so sloppy with their jump ins, that the Steves aren't necessarily panini pressed into fixing. And so this puts us down into a situation where it's an uncommon situation that people get away with more often because it's an uncommon situation. But yeah, there is that tension. I do think that going forward, we should see more Steves on the come up using walls next to platform, because it is such a powerful way to time gate interactions. And so with Steve, something that you can do to punish your opponent is to simply delay an interaction by having that wall there as a threat, because what happens most often is that people are either way too hot or way too cold. And so adjusting the tempo to which they're going to interact with the wall is something that players generally don't have developed when they are playing against Steve. And so you want to actually pay attention to whether Steve can be baited into doing something other than mining. And then Steve's RPS includes one of his options as, I'm going to call out your bluff and I'm going to keep mining. And so whenever you're too hot or too cold, it turns Steve's RPS into just a 50-50. Is he going to attack or is he going to mine? And so that's my perspective on that. So it's more just a general dynamic. I think that as we start to see more nuance and Steve players between 2 stacks, 3 stacks, rather than the 3-stack meta that's been playing most of the time, I think that the nuance of full hop heights is going to become more relevant. And so we'll see that become a more common counter, is you only really need something like a 2-stack against certain full hops, especially when it's a platform. So characters like Falco actually just straight up are forced into this. And so there's certain matchups where it actually just enables a very niche layout for relatively minimal resources. And so I don't have an exact answer on what that's going to look like, because we don't see the play developing enough. So that's something I personally will be learning in the coming days that I'm looking forward to.
All right, well, we'll see if the Steve players can figure out a little bit more niche resource management and kind of push the character even farther to push the counterplay even farther. But that's going to be it for today's episode. If you guys enjoyed the episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys have any ideas for any topics, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Until next time, class dismissed.